unabashed,
the most unpredictable,
becomes a headline,
the most volatile,
outrageous behavior,
unsubstantiated narratives, a battle of personalities.
Welcome to Grand Tamasha. I'm your host, Milan Vaishnav of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Last week, after what seemed like a never-ending election season, the second term of the Modi government got underway in earnest. Joining me to discuss the latest political developments in India is Kumar Uttam of the Hindustan Times. Kumar, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Milan. Thank you so much.
Last week, we saw a bit of a tussle within the BJP's top leadership, particularly on whether Defense Minister Rajnath Singh or Home Minister Amit Shah would be the number two to the Prime Minister. On Wednesday, Modi reconstituted 8 cabinet committees, and Shah was the only minister to be on every one of those 8 committees. Rajnath Singh, the defense minister, on the other hand, only featured on 2. 24 hours later, a revised list of committees was released. This time, Singh found his name on 6 of the 8 committees. Kumar, tell us what this about-face reveals about politics that are going on inside of the cabinet.
Milan, a lot of churning is happening within the government and the Bharatiya Janata Party, which rules India. The appointments relating to the cabinet committees were just an example of how the power dynamics has changed in India. Prime Minister Modi has immense confidence in Amit Shah. Now, both have been comrade in arms since their Gujarat days and have a very good working relationship that serves interest for both. It is an arrangement, if I may call it, that allows Modi to stay away from several decisions and let Shah face the flak if they go the wrong way. In cases where there is a dispute and a decision has to be implemented, Shah can get away by suggesting to others in the party that the decision was of the Modi, and if the decision is coming from Modi, nobody in the BJP questions them. Now, as people say, Modi and Shah can speak to each other even without talking to them. Now, that is the kind of synergy that exists between them, and Prime Minister Modi trusts Shah than any other leader in the party. Given this, it is natural that when Shah was inducted into the government as Home Minister, he would have a greater say in decision-making of the government. By making him members of all 8 committees of the cabinet, Prime Minister Modi gave Shah a standing in the government and also sent out a loud message to the outside world, as well as to members in his Council of Ministers about the changed power axis in the ruling coalition. Now, that change was articulated more clearly by dropping Rajnath Singh from many committees and later restoring his membership in a couple of more panels. Rajnath Singh also knows that the government decision making will now exist between Modi and Shah for all practical purposes, and restoring his membership in some panels is not going to give him any veto powers in the government. And he is going to have, he's going to play a second fiddle to the power couple of Narendra Modi and Amit Shah in the government.
So, many people have argued that, no matter what the committee makeup actually is, Amit Shah is going to be the de facto number 2 in this government, and that he'll essentially function as a deputy prime minister, even if he doesn't have that title. Is that your reading as well of the situation?
Milan, to understand what has changed, let me talk about the previous term of Narendra Modi as India's Prime Minister between 2014 and 2019. Rajnath Singh at that time was the Home Minister, and he was the official number 2 of the previous government. But for all practical purposes, the power that came with the number 2 position remained vested with 2 people. First, it was then Finance Minister Arvind Subramanian and Amit Shah, who was the party president at that time. So their roles even overlapped at times. So Jaitley was, when it came to government matters, Jaitley was calling the shots after Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and in the party it was Amit Shah who was taking all the decisions. So, but there were occasions when Arun Jaitley was even interfering or taking calls on organizational issues, like when the BJP decided to build an alliance with Nitish Kumar, who had openly revolted against Narendra Modi before the 2014 election. Mr. Arun Jaitley played a very crucial role in bringing Nitish Kumar back into the NDA. Similarly, there were occasions when Amit Shah was giving feedback to the Prime Minister and on policy matters, and even suggesting a way forward. So there were occasions when the role of Arun Jaitley and Amit Shah overlapped on certain occasions. Now, that was the power axis in the previous government. So even if Rajnath Singh was the number 2 in Modi's Council of Ministers, the actual power rested with Jaitley and Shah obviously apart from Mr. Modi. Now, two things have changed in the second term of Modi as Prime Minister this month. First, Mr. Arun Jaitley is no more the finance minister and he's out of the Council of Ministers for health reasons. All of us know that. And second, Mr. Amit Shah has joined the government as Home Minister, a position that was previously held by Mr. Rajnath Singh. Now, so the power axis that involved three people in the previous government, namely Mr. Modi, Amit Shah and Arun Jaitley, has now been reduced to just two people. That is Amit Shah and Narendra Modi. Now, the power arrangement of Modi and Amit Shah that existed earlier has been given some formal shape this time. And do remember that Amit Shah continues to be the BJP chief, and it's likely that he'll continue as BJP chief for some more months now, or until December, when the organizational elections of BJP is due. And being the Home Minister and also the President of the ruling party gives more power to Amit Shah. So yes, Amit Shah is the de facto number 2 of the government, even if that position is formally held by Rajnath Singh.
So you mentioned that Amit Shah could remain BJP party president for some more months, but you wrote a piece on June 1st speculating about who the front runners to replace Shah might be. Tell us a little bit about who could be tipped to take over the party from Amit Shah once he steps down.
So, Milan, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi dropped his health minister, his name is Jagat Prakash Nadda, from the Council of Ministers this time. Jagat Prakash Nadda was the health minister in the previous government, but he was not inducted into the Council of Ministers this time. So this was seen as a hint that Modi wanted Nadda to be free from other responsibilities so that he can take up the organizational assignment in BJP. Now, the BJP follows one man, one post principle, and it would have been very difficult for Nadda to continue as minister and the BJP chief at the same time. Now, let me tell you who this Jagat Prakash Nadda is. He is a member of the upper house of Indian Parliament and a politician from the hill state of Himachal Pradesh. Now, Nadda comes from an RSS background and was a key member of the Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, which is the student wing of the RSS. Mr. Nadda was also considered for the BJP president's post in 2016 when Amit Shah was to take over, when Rajnath Singh had stepped down and had joined Narendra Modi's government as Home Minister. But a personal recommendation from Mr. Modi in favor of Mr. Amit Shah got that BJP president's job for Amit Shah at that time. So Nadda was also in contention for the BJP president's post last time. So he's obviously one of the front runner for the BJP president's post this time, and his proximity to the RSS is also helping him. But remember, it is not going to be an easy task for any new president, whosoever he or she is, to run the BJP that it is now. No, the BJP has grown in size, it has ventured into new territory, it has a strong membership base of 11 crore plus members, and even in this election BJP has made some strong gains in state like West Bengal, where it has won 18 Lok Sabha seats, and in Telangana, southern state of Telangana, where its vote share has increased up to 20% and they have won 4 seats. So it will not be an easy task, and both Mr. Modi and Amit Shah will not allow, they will want to have a greater control, or the control that they have now on the BJP, to continue. So in that case, you may not rule out a surprise candidate in that case. Though Mr. Nadda comes from a RSS background, but he is a contemporary of Amit Shah. So if there is a choice to be selected from outside, what option is available to the BJP right now, the names of Party General Secretary Mr. Bhupendra Yadav is one of the probable names that is being considered. So I'll say there are only 2 strong candidates at the moment. One is Mr. Nadda, who has been dropped from the Council of Ministers, and the second is Mr. Bhupendra Yadav, who again comes from a RSS background and is currently the General Secretary. General Secretary's post is the most powerful post after the President's post in BJP. There are 6 or 7 General Secretaries right now, and Mr. Bhupendra Yadav is one of those General Secretaries.
So let's switch our focus from the party organization to the government. The government announced that the budget session would run about 40 days from June 17th to July 27th. Other than presenting the budget itself, which I believe is due on July 5th, Do we know anything more about what the government's early legislative priorities might be?
Milind, as you said, presenting the budget will be the most important subject for the government in this budget session. Remember when the government had presented an interim budget in earlier this year before the elections, then Finance Minister Piyush Goyal had announced that, okay, we are giving some reliefs to the middle class and more reliefs will be offered when we return to power. Now the BJP has returned to power and BJP will have to keep its promise, and the indication that we are receiving from the government is probably there will be some changes and more relief to the middle class. That is one. Having said that, one of the main agendas or the ideological issues which the BJP has been talking about is banning of the triple talaq. The government had introduced a bill in the last Lok Sabha to ban instant triple talaq, and it was passed by the Lok Sabha, then sent to the Rajya Sabha, which is the upper house of parliament, but the government doesn't have a majority in the Rajya Sabha, and the bill got stuck over there. There was a select committee which went into the bill and then suggested some changes. Then the government came out with ordinance, and that tussle kept on going in the previous Lok Sabha. Now the Lok Sabha has been dissolved and this bill was introduced in the Lok Sabha, so the bill has also lapsed. The government is now, they have clearly said they are going to bring this bill again in the Lok Sabha and showing determination that we are here to push this agenda. And remember in his speech to the BJP NDA parliamentary party when he took over and when he was elected the leader of the NDA parliamentary party, Prime Minister coined a slogan that it was Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas and Sabka Vishwas. He added another word called Sabka Vishwas. Sabka Vishwas means winning confidence of every section of the society. The government leaders are saying that when he's talking about winning confidence of every section of the society, so this banning of triple talaq is one of the important steps in that direction when he's reaching out to the women or female members of the Muslim community who have been victim of triple talaq. Now, another bill is to set up a national medical education to regulate medical education in India. That is also expected to come up in this budget session, and also a bill to provide a data protection law that is being discussed in the government and is likely to be brought in this session.
So I want to end this session by asking you to share with our listeners one story coming out of this week that you think hasn't been adequately reported, but that we should be paying attention to. What would be on your list, Kumar?
Milind, though it has made 2 page ones on some occasions, I'll say the kind of violence that has happened in West Bengal. West Bengal is the only state where we have seen poll-related violence before the Lok Sabha elections, and after results have been declared, there have been a spate of killings of both BJP and TMC workers. Now, the stellar show that the BJP has put up in West Bengal has certainly unnerved Miss Mamata Banerjee, and there is a bloody battle going on in the fields of West Bengal. The governor of West Bengal was in Delhi yesterday. He met Prime Minister and also met the Home Minister, and he has given a report about the ground situation there. So, in the last 48 hours, as we know, at least 4 BJP workers have been killed. Their bombs have been hurled on each other. So, that story is certainly unfolding, and with the BJP stepping up pressure on Mamata Banerjee. And remember, the assembly elections in West Bengal is due in 2021. So, certainly there is a pressure. Mamata Banerjee is feeling the pressure. BJP is building the pressure. There is a retaliation from Trinamool Congress and a lot of activities happening on the ground. So, this is the story that will unfold in the next few months, next few weeks, and it needs a close watch to what.
So I think a story that everyone should be paying attention to is an opinion piece that was written by the former chief economic advisor to the government of India, Arvind Subramanian, which appeared in today's Indian Express, based on a technical study that he did showing that Indian GDP growth could be around 2.5 percentage points lower than what the government has reported. This is looking at data starting in 2011 and ending in 2017. there are many controversies around the GDP numbers. This only addresses one of them, which has to do with the methodological changes that began under the previous government and were finally instituted by this government. But I think this is going to raise many, many more questions in the minds of investors, of economists, and others who look at the Indian economy saying, the number that we have on paper does not seem to adequately represent what's actually happening on the ground. So this is going to be a story, I think, to watch, especially to see how the government is going to respond to this news.
Milan, the government's response, though obviously they have not spoken it on record, they have been saying that the numbers which was earlier projected was done by the same man who is now questioning all these numbers. So probably he would have done great service by making those corrections, or at least speaking out when he was in office. Once he has demitted the office, once he is outside the government, he is coming out with several theories that the GDP numbers may not be 7 point this much percent, and it may be lower than 2.5% or whatever it is. So the government feels all this wisdom has come to him only after he has demitted office. But obviously there is a politics behind it which is playing out. But yes, more seriously, the economy part of it is something which the government will seriously need to deal with.
So I want to ask you, who do you think had the best week in India this past week?
Well, and I will obviously say it was Amit Shah, with the kind of media coverage that he has got in the Home Ministry. So everybody is just writing about what great job Amit Shah is doing, the changes that he has brought, the action that he is taking in Kashmir, and the way he's controlling the ministers, the government. Remember, he recently called a couple of ministers to his office in Home Ministry and discussed subject that is remotely associated with the Home Ministry, and it was splashed across newspapers and it was all over the television. And the prime time debate that is happening is about Amit Shah and how he's bringing a change in the government. So obviously he had a very good week last week.
So my vote for the best week is BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC is an organization that many people outside of South Asia probably have not heard about. It stands for the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. It is a regional organization that India has tried to push in terms of raising its profile. The Prime Minister recently traveled to Sri Lanka to discuss cooperation with the leaders there. The Foreign Minister was in Bhutan. This is all an effort to really prop up BIMSTEC in the place of SAARC, which is the now somewhat defunct regional organization. The big difference being that Pakistan does not figure into BIMSTEC, and it does figure into SAARC. And so therefore, they could try to bypass any political issues they might face with fostering greater trade, cooperation, diplomatic cooperation, and so on by going through BIMSTEC. The leaders of the BIMSTEC countries did make a special appearance. They were special invitees at Prime Minister Modi's inauguration. So I think this is an organization that I think we'll be hearing a lot more about in the weeks and months to come. Kumar, who do you think had the worst week in India?
Milan, I have two choices for this. First, there are 3 journalists who have been arrested by the police of Uttar Pradesh, which is India's most populous state, for tweeting something about its chief minister. Now, there was a lady who came out with some scandalous allegations, and there were journalists who tweeted that story. That lady had given a bite, and these journalists tweeted that bite with certain remarks which the UP police felt it was derogatory, and they registered a complaint against him and they picked him up. And a television channel which held a debate on this issue was closed down. The CEO was arrested. The anchor who was anchoring, the editor who was of the channel was arrested, and today the Supreme Court has ordered release of one of the journalists who was arrested on these charges. So certainly these 3 journalists had a very bad week in India this week. Now while I was thinking of it, I was also thinking about people on the streets, people in Delhi, people in Bhopal, people in Lucknow and other cities of India who are battling a strong heat wave in Delhi. So in many cities the temperature is almost nearing 50 degrees Celsius. It's just Amazing, it has never happened before. In Delhi, it was the temperature recorded was 48 degrees Celsius. And there is a huge rush to the hill stations in India, and there is a huge jam, 30-kilometer long jam. People are not getting hotel rooms in all these hill stations, and there is no parking space available, and people are just sleeping under the sky, and just returning without spending much time in the hill stations.
So my vote for worst week is the Congress Party state units. We saw a bit of a kerfuffle in the Rajasthan unit. The Chief Minister, Ashok Gehlot, accused his deputy and young Congress leader Sachin Pilot of not ensuring Ashok Gehlot's son's election in the recent parliamentary elections. We saw the defection of a large number of Congress MLAs in the state of Telangana. We hear continuing rumors about infighting in the Madhya Pradesh government. And so while a lot of the media stories and international attention focus on the position of Rahul Gandhi, whether he will or will not step down as Congress Party president, in the meantime, there are a number of low-grade civil wars going on within the Congress Party state units that, if they wait long enough, many of these things could to break out into the open and lead, I think, to lasting damage. So,
no, I was saying, Milan, just like you spoke about Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, there is a tussle also going on in Punjab. The Chief Minister Amrinder Singh has won Punjab for Congress. It is one of the few states where the Congress has done really well. And after the result, there is a public spat between the Chief Minister and former cricketer Navjot Singh Sidhu, who is a minister in his cabinet. And after this spat, Navjot Singh Sidhu came to Delhi and made complaint to Rahul Gandhi and all. But all these tussles or internal contradictions that is playing out today has been simmering for some time now, Milan. And in Rajasthan, when the current chief minister was chosen to head the government, the deputy chief minister Sachin Pilot was nursing a grudge against him because he was perhaps waiting for an opportunity to strike back at the chief minister, because he felt, as Rajasthan Congress president for some time, he had done a lot of work, and when it came to choosing somebody as chief minister, his claim was rejected, and Mr. Gehlot was made the chief minister in Rajasthan. So these internal contradictions within the Congress will play out for some time now. Much will depend on how Rahul Gandhi, what decision Rahul Gandhi takes in the next coming months, whether he is going to continue or whether he is going to find someone to replace him as the Congress president.
Kumar, thanks so much for joining us. It's been great to have you on, and hope that we can get you back in the coming weeks and months. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Milan. Thank you so much.
So after a quick break, I'll be back to talk with Ashley Tellis on the foreign policy challenges facing the Modi government. My guest on the podcast today is Ashley Tellis. Ashley holds the Tata Chair for Strategic Affairs here at Carnegie and is arguably the country's foremost expert on South Asian security issues. Over his distinguished career, Ashley has been both a participant on the front lines of U.S. policy towards India, as well as one of its keenest observers. Ashley is the author of a new Carnegie essay, Troubles Aplenty, Foreign Policy Challenges for the Next Indian Government. I'm pleased to welcome him to the podcast for the very first time. Ashley, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Milan. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I want to get right into your new piece. You write that no prime minister since Nehru, India's first prime minister, has been so personally engaged in such a wide range of global issues, ranging from climate change to strategic realignments, as Modi has been. What, in your view, are the roots of Modi's activism on the foreign policy scene?
I think there are two roots that explain his activism. One is a personal sort of conviction. He came out of Gujarat, not well understood, not known on the international stage. He saw the international stage as the perfect arena to make an impact. And so there was a personal motivation that drove him to play this role in ways that were not anticipated during his election campaign. But there's also a second route, and that I think comes from his RSS background and his civilizational understanding of India. He's always sort of made the argument that India should be the Vishwa Guru to the nations. It should be the teacher to the nations. And he has a genuine pride in Indian civilization and what India has to teach the world. And so I saw his international activism as really an extension of that very deeply held private conviction. Then it simply became a matter of what the opportunities were, what the avenues were, and what the issues were. And he just seized every one of these possibilities whenever they appeared and ran with them.
So before we get into talking about the agenda for the future, I'd want you to reflect a little bit on Modi's foreign policy record from the first term. In your essay, you write, and I want to quote you here, "The record of the last 5 years suggests that even when Modi did not falter, India's strategic aims were often frustrated by both contextual constraints and the limitations of its national capabilities." Can you unpack for some of our listeners what these constraints and limitations are if you take the prime minister and put him to one side?
Well, there are several constraints. I mean, the first and most immediate are bureaucratic. India simply does not have the capacity to sustain the kind of engagement that Modi, the person, would like India to sustain. I'll give you a simple example. US-India relations today are very broad and cover a huge gamut of issues. But there is one gateway through which all these interactions have to go, and that's the Ministry of External Affairs. The Ministry of External Affairs oversees all of India's engagements in everything from defense to climate change, to the environment, to economics, to trade, and so on and so forth. The country does not have the capacity to sustain engagement with such a narrow sluice that controls exit and entry.
And we know that just in terms of personnel, it's relatively small to begin with.
Absolutely. And if you then look at the size of the Americas division, that is smaller still, right? So that's one set of constraints. The second is national power. People forget that when nations interact, the great outcomes are not simply a function of the diplomatic equity of their diplomats. It's fundamentally a reflection of the power capabilities they bring to bear. The US gets its way most of the time, not because it has fantastic diplomats, though it does, but because these diplomats are representing, the collective power of the United States. India often lacks that power. And so its diplomats do a very good job and sometimes, sort of surprisingly are effective, given that it doesn't have the resources. And that is something to think about. So if India doesn't fix what I see as the fundamental constraint, which is, weaknesses in terms of power, resources, economic resources, it's going to be very hard for Indian diplomacy to chalk up wins simply on the strength of, the excellence of individual diplomats or even the skills of the Foreign Service writ large.
I mean, another way of saying that, Ashley, is this old saying that you often hear, which is, the best foreign policy for India is 8% growth, right?
Absolutely.
Sustained over 25 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you divide up the foreign policy agenda into 3 parts. India and its immediate periphery, its relationship with middle powers, and its relationship with China and India, arguably the 2 most pivotal major actors on the international scene. Let me ask you first about the neighborhood. The conventional narrative, if I had to sum it up about the first term, is that Modi got out of the gate right away with intensive diplomatic outreach to really all of the South Asian neighbors, but that this attention wasn't really backed up by a long-term strategy. Is this a fair assessment in your view? And what does the Prime Minister have to do in concrete terms in a second term to really enhance or live up to some of the rhetorical promise that we saw, say, in 2014, 2015?
I think that criticism is partly true because what Modi was hoping to achieve was outcomes on the strength of diplomatic spectaculars. And so he invites leaders from the neighborhood to his inauguration. He engages in a very high-profile peace initiative with Pakistan. And there is a certain momentum that these initiatives, carry. But if they're not backed up by an understanding of what needs to be done to capitalize on that momentum, you're going to end up falling short. Now, in the case of Pakistan is a special case for all sorts of reasons. But even when you look at smaller countries, I think there has been a failure with follow-through. Now, let me give you an example of where India did things right. Bangladesh. The relationship with Bangladesh is really remarkable because Modi recognizes that Prime Minister Hasina is really his best ally. He wants to tighten that relationship and those bonds. So India develops a strategy where it gets out of the way very quickly the disagreements between Bangladesh and India. For example, on questions relating to the maritime boundaries, on questions relating to how to manage the border, issues relating to internal security, so on and so forth. And so there's a policy agenda that sort of comports with the Prime Minister's interest in building this new relationship with Bangladesh. We haven't seen a comparable strategy with respect to, say, Sri Lanka. And the strategy with respect to Nepal, I think, faltered in large part because of mishaps at the Indian end. So where there has been a strategy that sort of pushed the diplomatic momentum to completion, those were successes. Where the strategy was absent, I think that's where you saw quite conspicuous failures or shortcomings.
So Modi's leadership, his initial activism may have been a kind of necessary condition, but it was ultimately insufficient.
Absolutely. And in part, again, I want to flag a bureaucratic point. He did not have people in the Council of Ministers who could carry the burden that he had begun to carry. And part of the problem is the centralization that occurred in power in Delhi in the first term in his own office. India is too big and its neighborhood is too complicated for the Prime Minister to run both domestic and foreign policy successfully all the time. And I think he lacked peers in the cabinet who could sort of carry the ball that he had begun to roll.
Let me turn from the immediate neighborhood to our own country, the United States, because if you read the newspapers, it's very clear we're entering a tumultuous period in bilateral relationships, particularly when it comes to the economic side of the house. Last week, the Trump administration formally revoked India's status as a beneficiary of unilateral trade preferences under the GSP, or Generalized System of Preferences program. I think a question that I get asked a lot, I'm sure you do too, Ashley, is Make America Great Again and Make in India sort of destined for a collision course? Is there a way sort of out of this, these two worldviews which seem so much at odds?
I am actually quite fearful about the future of the U.S.-India relationship, at least for the remainder of the Trump administration. And that is for two reasons. Prior to Trump coming into office, the presumption in the United States with respect to India was, we have to be extremely supportive of India's rise, and that means accepting certain limitations that India would have, both in the political space and in the economic space. We are now in a somewhat awkward moment where you have an administration that is genuinely Janus-faced. The security part of the relationship is going on very well, but it's a part that the president personally is not very interested in. And there is an economic part of the relationship which the president is very deeply interested in, but where India's limitations as a partner are seen in the clearest relief. So what you have is a contradiction. The things that help the relationship survive are things that the president is personally not invested in and doesn't care about. And the things that the president cares about are things where India can give us very little satisfaction. So if you look at the long-term trajectory of this relationship over the next 2 years, I see big challenges with respect to trade issues, some of which precipitated the decision to reverse GSP. There are other issues coming down the pike, which have to do with, for example, data localization, market access, and so on and so forth, which are going to be very difficult for India to resolve. And I don't see any willingness in Washington to give India a pass on these issues. So unless Modi can sort of pull a rabbit out of the hat in the next few months, I think we are in for a very scratchy period.
But, then the obvious question is, given what you've just said about the U.S. administration, does it then hollow out or diminish all of the talk about a strategy for a free and open Indo-Pacific? Because you may well have a diplomatic strategy in place, a defense strategy in place, but the economic strategy then seems to be absent, because if you believed your own rhetoric, then you would take a much more long-term enlightened view of India and say, look, I'm not going to obsess over one trade deficit number, which, by the way, is orders of magnitude smaller than the Chinese trade deficit. We're going to look at the larger picture. I mean, do you think that's a fair critique?
I think that is a real assessment of the problem. That if we were really taking the long view, we would see the impediments with India on the economic front in the context of recognizing the challenges that India has. I mean, we have to remember that the US also grew behind very high tariff walls until we reached a certain standard of per capita income and then began to reduce our tariffs. India is exactly in that same position, where it's attempting to grow behind relatively high tariff walls until it reaches a certain standard of development. I don't think there is enough adequate recognition of that reality. And then when you combine it with what I mentioned earlier, the sort of Janus-faced approach in the administration, I don't think people have connected the dots from the strategic dimension to the economic dimension and back again. And so there is a real chance that the Indo-Pacific strategy would be hollowed out precisely because we cannot keep India as a partner in a way that we would like. One other thought on that. It's hard for people in Washington to remember, but this is absolutely true. The relationship with India is like a lattice, and things bleed from one issue area into another. If you pull a string, you could unravel the entire lattice. And so it's very hard to tell Indians, well, we have an economic problem with you. You should learn to compartmentalize it. But we also have a wonderful strategic relationship, and let's keep building the strategic relationship. It never worked. It didn't work for 30 years when we told the Indians that story on non-proliferation. We have a disagreement, compartmentalize it, we'll work wonderfully everywhere else. It never worked. And today, the analog to non-proliferation of yesteryears is essentially our trade deficits. And I think we may be, unfortunately, going down the same path.
Because everything is linked to everything else, ultimately.
Absolutely.
You conclude your essay by saying that the limitations of Indian foreign policy are intimately linked to its weaknesses at home. And I'm wondering if you could just help us understand in a more granular way, what are the ways in which Indian political economy could upset India's foreign policy ambitions? Because the argument you're really making, again, to go back to the idea that the best foreign policy is 8% growth, is the most important foreign policy priority is actually domestic development. And unless and until we see more far-reaching structural reforms that have to do with the balance between the state and private capital, that which have to do with openness to trade and globalization, that have to do with the administrative state, the rule of law, foreign policy will continue, in some sense, to suffer.
That is absolutely true. I think there are three areas where India has to sort of set itself right. The first is doing what is needed to sustain high levels of economic growth for a fairly long period of time. The danger that I see in India is that people tally up all of India's potential endowments and presume that because the potential endowments look impressive, high levels of economic growth are an automatic consequence, as if policy decisions are unrequired. And that is a big mistake, because we have seen so many cases in international development economics where countries have had great and impressive endowments, but have never translated that into sustained growth.
I mean, that's the danger with all the talk about the demographic dividend, for example, right? I mean, if you don't have jobs for the masses which join the labor force every day, every month, every year, then you have a big social problem.
Absolutely. So the things that have to be done to sustain growth, that's one aspect. The second has to do with the vision that the world has of India and the welcome that the world offers to India. And to my mind, that is really important, and it is linked to India's cosmopolitan character and its liberal democracy. If the shine goes off the India story as essentially an example of democracy in a country that is still poor, in a country that is still diverse, I think the receptivity in the international community to welcome India's rise will diminish. And with that diminished receptivity will come constraints that India thought it was escaping. So maintaining the character of India's democratic regime, and especially its liberal regime, is actually fundamental for the Indian success story to be realized. And then the third is India's view of partnerships. India cannot sustain partnerships if all it wants in the partnerships are things for itself. It has to learn to also put things on the table. And this is as true of the United States as it is true of its own immediate neighbors, right? And with respect to its immediate neighbors in particular, I think India has to go back and recognize, what hegemonic stability really means, right? Which is, you have to say we are privileged providers because we are the biggest entity, and we are willing to be more generous than we have to be in order to create conditions for long-term cooperation in the face of such asymmetries. That's fundamentally what India needs to do within its region. And outside its region, it needs to be able to show that it can be a willing partner as opposed to a partner that is always on the lookout for, sort of advantages put on the table that benefit it. Now, the US has had 20 years of what I've called strategic altruism, and I would prefer that be sustained for a while longer. But certainly with the Trump administration, that's a very hard argument to make and sell. And so India needs to sort of rethink partnerships, not simply in terms of what it gets, but also what it gives.
Let me just ask you one final question before we end. You've known the new foreign minister, Dr. S Jaishankar, for quite some time. He was foreign secretary, he was ambassador to Washington, ambassador to China. Tell us in a nutshell what the significance of his appointment is to this government in its second innings.
I think it is really an inspired choice in many ways because, one, he is genuinely an individual who thinks strategically. And everything that we have talked about in this broadcast are things that he would feel very comfortable with and would appreciate intuitively. So he brings a strategic mind to the job, which has been sort of exceptional in India's history, particularly where the management of foreign relations is concerned. The second is because he comes from the foreign policy bureaucracy. I think he will be able to move the bureaucratic machinery in ways that can support policy far more effortlessly than people who have come from outside it. And then the third component is that the third strength that he has is that the Prime Minister trusts him. And so you could actually imagine an environment where he is given a lot of latitude to do things that are in India's interests without having to look over his shoulder. And that is obviously an opportunity that his predecessor did not have. So on these three counts, he's actually well positioned to take India in the direction that I would like to see it go.
So Ashley, I think you and I could probably stay here for hours and talk more about Indian foreign policy, but I know you're a busy man, you have places to go and people to see. I just want to thank you for coming on the show and hope you'll come back soon.
Pleasure. Look forward to it. Thank you, Willard.
Grant Tamasha is a co-production of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Hindustan Times. You can find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to rate and review. It helps others find the show more easily. For more information about the show and to find the writing we reference on this week's episode, visit our website, granttamasha.com. Production assistance comes from Jamie Hinson and Rachel Osnos. Tim Martin's our audio engineer, and Lauren Duax our executive producer. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.